Welcome back. I've got Susan Heinking online. Susan, how are you?
Good. Thank you for having me today.
Really looking forward to this conversation. You do some really cool work. So why don't you share a little about you and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Sure. So my career journey is 100% in the built environment. I went to school for architecture. I'm a licensed architect. I actually did architecture for a little over 10 years before jumping over to the construction side. And I had a 50-50 split right now in my career. So 10 years in architecture, I've been in 10 years in construction, but the common denominator between the two has been sustainable buildings.
And I think that's what we really need. And we talked about this a little bit in the pre-show, just about one, obviously new construction, new buildings, but we know, especially in certain parts of our country, some of the buildings are quite old and will need to be replaced probably within our lifetime. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. And over your journey over the last 20 years, I was going to say, did you start when you were five? I mean, you've lived quite the career in a short period of time. But I'm curious as to, what are some of the things that you've seen and I try to stay out of politics as much as I can, but has government over the last, I'd say, decade or so been easier to make some of the innovations in the sustainable build happen, or have there been roadblocks that you've had to navigate around or through in order to design what you truly want to design?
So it has not been a straight line getting to where we are today. It's been kind of like a jungle gym, just swinging around trying to find, what is the right line to kind of get us to where we believe we need to go. As far as regulation, legislation, depending on when it happened in my career journey, it either hurt me or helped me. So in the beginning, when I started out, everyone was like, climate change is not a thing, global warming is not a thing. And so you know, people in the sustainable industry have really seen that shift to people understanding that climate change is a thing, global warming is a thing, and that it's something that we can't reverse. We're past that point. We can just make it less bad going forward, and we have to have our buildings adapt to these new climate models and these new weather patterns. And so when you talk about existing buildings kind of, being around for almost 100 years, how are we going to take something that was built in the, mid 1900s, and how are we going to adapt it to the climate models? That's something that we are talking about. How do those buildings work with how people work today and how the weather is? And, existing buildings are actually our most sustainable buildings because they're already there and it takes less energy and materials to actually retrofit them rather than tearing them down and building brand new. But as a culture, we like bright, new, shiny things, and we like to build new. So there is a kind of a balance there between, what buildings make the most sense to demolish and build new versus what makes the most sense to retrofit and keep.
You had mentioned the weather thing, and I know in history, weather patterns do change, but I have witnessed it where I have seen some significant changes in weather patterns in my lifetime where historically, hundreds of years ago, it may take, a century or two before we start seeing these shifting patterns. Now we're seeing multiple shifts in a shorter period of time to speak to what we have collectively done to make this happen. And now it's like, and I agree with you, damage is done. The cat's out of the bag. What do we do to mitigate that so we don't make it even worse? What are some things we're doing? And that's where, the proactive work that you do and a lot of other agencies and, support groups and charities and all that stuff collectively, together, if each of us takes a step, it makes a huge difference in how things are going. And, I love how you mentioned, the existing buildings you can retrofit. because it's okay. You've got the shell, you've got some things. Okay, we go through, we replace all the lighting. Okay, the condo building that I live in, they did that over the last couple of years, and one, the lighting is better, it's brighter. Secondly, the common area fees, have been kept under control because they found ways to find some energy efficiencies, which of course reduces the strain, and obviously, everything goes on. EV vehicles and all the other innovations and people using transit. There's all these different things that we can do. But when it comes to, building and things like that, I agree with you. People love those shiny new buildings. Oh, this is great. But I've seen and gone into buildings that have been completely renovated, and it's like, oh wow, this is cool. They maintained like the exterior component of it because it had a historical look to it. I'm thinking one building in particular. But you go inside, and it's like, you guys could have built this last week, and everything's common. It's easy to do. So it's one of those fine lines where, again, it really depends on what makes sense. Obviously, local bylaws, ordinances, and whatnot. If it's a historical building, okay, white glove time. We can't really change a whole lot, but we can do some things here. So when you're working with organizations that are looking for a build, and I'm guessing, again, going back to what you just talked about, I'm guessing a lot of people want the brand new shiny things, but if there's something existing that would meet their needs in the area, what's that dialogue like? I'm just kind of trying to peel back the curtain a little bit, because I know sometimes people say, well, we want a building that does this and this and this. And, are they sold on we have to have it be brand new, or are they open to using something that's existing in the community that would work well for them? I'm just curious, what your experience has been over the last 20 years with something
Yeah.
like that.
I think it's definitely client driven. Is it owner occupied type of building that tends to be more open to that existing building journey versus am I a developer and I need to sell it? I need to flip it real quick. Or I'm a developer and I'm trying to get a tenant in. Like there's a certain market for certain things. Some people don't believe that existing buildings can actually be energy efficient. We have a case study of a historic building in Cincinnati, Ohio, that we worked with the architect to actually get to net zero. So it's a 112-year-old building that actually we were able to get to net zero and keep the historic landmark that building already had and get historical tax credits on top of it. So it's just, you've got to get the right team that can solve those particular problems and really collaborate. And the reason why, the building industry is tackling, I guess, sustainability and looking at climate change and all of these weather patterns is because if you look at a pie chart of like, okay, where's all the air pollution coming from? Or the greenhouse gases? Because it's the same thing. Greenhouse gases are air pollution. Almost 40% are buildings. So we have a pretty good chunk of the pie that we as building industry professionals are responsible for going forward to make sure that we are designing, building in a responsible manner, not only for the planet, but, for people. Because as people, or at least Americans, we spend 90% of our time indoors. So this is our environment. And so we want to make sure that we are creating that balance with nature in the
Yeah.
process.
No, it's important to do that. And yeah, I knew that stat was high, but I didn't realize it was 90%. But it doesn't surprise me. Even during the early days of the pandemic, a lot of people were staying home inside unless, the weather was conducive, then they'd be outside a little bit more maybe. But we noticed it just in areas where ravines and rivers were starting to get cleaned up because we weren't in pollution generating type of buildings or driving and all as much and things like that. So we noticed nature kind of rebounding a little bit, which was an interesting dynamic and going, okay, there's something to learn from here. What can we do
Yeah.
about this? So I want to go back to something you said a few moments ago about, and this was more on the government intervention and regulations and things like that. And you said where some of them were helpful, some of them were hurtful. I guess, let's dive into the hurtful side of things. Well, and how, I'm curious as to how did you navigate through some of those things? I mean, give, whatever details you can. I don't want to point fingers at any particular government or anything like that, but unless you want to, I'm okay with that. But if I'm just curious to see how, when you face something like that, with your career and your expertise and your leadership, what are some things you do to help kind of go through those things? Because I'm guessing, what you did is transferable to our audience being able to navigate through challenging situations, whether it's problems from clients or government regulation or the economy or who knows what. So I'm curious to kind of give me an example of something you had to deal with.
So let me explain what I meant. So in the early years, when regulation came out to kind of really push sustainability, that's what was helpful because it was kind of like the carrot versus the stick. Like, well, it's regulation, you have to do it. It kind of helped push our message further. In the beginning, if regulation rebounded or reversed, it was hurtful because it's like, well, now I've got to figure out a different avenue to kind of sell sustainability on this project. Fast forward to today, the market demands it so much that it really doesn't matter what the regulation does. It can push, it can pull. The market is what it is. People want sustainability, people want healthy buildings. So we don't necessarily rely too much on what the government's doing to kind of push sustainability. The government's never going to say, well, build unhealthy buildings. That's never going to happen. But they might say, well, we're going to take this tax incentive away, or we're not going to provide additional funds to help pay off your solar panels on your building. So that's kind of where it gets hurtful because the economics of scale. But when you're kind of faced with a barrier or hurdle, what I found is just that the communication and the language in which you're talking to your client in, like that's the sell, that's the pitch. So it's not about sustainability to somebody might not be about the environment, but it might be about, okay, well, this building is gonna save you money over the long term. Or you have an upfront investment now, but you're gonna get your money back within 5 years. That rings true to a lot of clients, with their project budgets. Another thing like K through 12 schools, if you talk about indoor air quality being healthier for the students to learn in, they gravitate to that. So it's just finding, kind of those different motivators that you can tie back to sustainability and the benefits of sustainability that have allowed us to kind of get over any sort of regulation hurdles or pullbacks.
Well, it's important. We'll pick on the kids for a moment. If you have a healthy breathing environment in school, from a long-term standpoint, I used to work in primary care, but if you live and operate in a healthier environment, that reduces the likelihood that you're going to have health issues, which is a strain on the healthcare system, which adds cost to everything. So creating healthy environments creates healthy people. And that's where you connect those dots sometimes when you're having conversations with, government agencies that are going, no, we want to claw back some of these tax incentives on solar panels or this or this. It's like, okay, understand why you're doing that, but that is going to add some burden to businesses that were planning on doing that. Now they won't, which means that particular building is going to continue to use traditional electricity, for example, and you want your pollution counts to go down. Well, let's look at solar as an option. That's the whole, it's like to encourage people because businesses and running businesses, as you know, quite expensive. Retrofitting or building new buildings, not cheap. But if there's incentives there to encourage people to do it, it creates jobs, it creates opportunities. There's this huge big picture effect. And I know sometimes people don't look at that, but in your industry, you see it. I mean, you've articulated it quite well that all these connecting pieces make it, okay, it's just a building. No. It's a good 40% of the population or the pollution that gets generated are from existing buildings. Well, let's nip that in the butt. We do. Even a 10% increase and reduction of that, what does that do? From a long-term health standpoint or a long-term cost and economic situation, it reduces the need to expand electrical grids or everything else that goes on. So it's a lot of people don't think about it, but it's such a huge component to the way we live, quite frankly.
I think it really, I mean, especially now with the demand that's on our utility grid, resilience has been a big topic. How are you being resilient within your own building? With the grid only being able to hold so much capacity. I mean, the government's doing what they can to expand the grid, but that they only can do so much too. So I think it's a lot of parts and pieces, like you were saying, that have to come together and do their own thing to kind of be resilient in their own building footprint.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to redesign a grid when everybody needs it to be up and running. It would be great. It's like, okay, let's just redesign this. What would it look like? Of course, it would be awesome to be able to do that, but I don't think we can shut the power down for, I don't know, years just to fix it. It's like, oh, no, it'll only take this time. If the government says something like it's only going to take this long, multiply that by 3, and then you might be close to when it actually gets completed. Just being sarcastic because it's true. That's what sarcasm is, I think, sometimes. But so I always ask this, of guests too, is and we've already kind of seen where things are going, but anything on the horizon that you see that, we're not necessarily doing a lot of right now, or maybe we're just starting to, for in the build industry, leveraging AI, for example. Everybody says, well, throw AI at it. It's like, okay, well, what does that mean? What do you mean by that? How are we going to use that? What does that do? Just curious to see, what you see on the horizon as far as construction, new builds, and things like that.
As far as AI, we're still kind of in the, you know, early stages, I guess, of utilizing AI. From the sustainability standpoint, what I'm seeing evolving are different architecture firms, different GCs coming together to figure out, is there a way we can standardize what we're doing so that everybody's kind of asking the same questions and collecting the same data across the board so we can say, like, are we actually making a difference? Where do we need to improve? How can we improve as a collective rather than just my firm doing it over here and my competitor's firm doing over there? What I'm seeing is that there's more peer groups being created for us to share our knowledge and help each other out. So the building industry is becoming a lot more collaborative in that sense, and it's actually spilling into supply chains. So the products, I mean, if you look at a building, it's just a kit of parts, really. Right? It's just products coming together. And so our initiatives with sustainability has spilled into the supply chain with the manufacturers. So now they're trying to figure out how to make their products more sustainable, more healthy. And so it's all just kind of working together right now in the early stages. Is AI going to be plugged into that some way, somehow? I'm assuming so, because it probably can find, the missing pieces to the puzzle for all of us to kind of get in line and connect. We're not there yet, but we're still in the early stages of, like, what are the questions we need to be asking each other? What's the data that we actually can collect? Once we get the data, what does it mean? Is it good or bad? Because we still don't know. And then how are we going to actually drive those numbers down towards energy efficiency or reduced greenhouse gases? So that's like the next chapter right now that we're entering in for sustainability in the built environment.
And I love the collaboration side of things. And I see where AI could be beneficial would be one. you ask the same questions. Like, oh, you have a standard operating procedure on builds, and it's just, like templates that everybody knows. From a supply chain standpoint, you have, okay, all of these builds in a particular area are using these types of parts. Okay, what's the turnaround time to deliver them? Okay, which ones would be more efficient? Because like anything, we have our favorite pieces or parts that we do. So okay, we always order this type of bracket or this type of whatever in our builds where, okay, there might actually be something that's more sustainable that'll do the work, is not going to cause extra grief to the construction team. It's like, oh yeah, we want to use this because it's efficient. It's like if it adds an extra 2 hours to what they have to do in order to finish their job, it's like, okay, there's cost efficiency and then there's efficiencies. Like you have to weigh those two things. And again, that's where sometimes you can have AI do the analysis to figure out, okay, how does that all play out? Again, it's only as good as what you tell it to do and what you ask, but there's definitely some opportunities to go deeper into, a massive amount of information to find, okay, here's a way for us to turn these buildings around in a much shorter period of time. And, share a quick story. A good colleague and friend of mine that I've known for years, his parents, now retired, but in the Midwest, they were basically a partner with a fast food chain that rhymes with McDonald's. Anyway, so they were tasked, they built the McDonald's locations throughout the, Chicago, Illinois, and, that general area. And, they could go from a slab of land, nothing on there, to an up and running store in like no time at all because they had the systems, they had the parts, they had the supply chain. It's just like boom, boom, boom. And it wasn't like they all looked the same. There was variances on how each restaurant looked, but not too many. But it's like the core of it, here's this, this, and this. And they were able to turn these things around. Of course, McDonald's loves them some supply chain efficiencies. So to the point where they keep quiet and they don't tell you about it because, well, that's is a competitive advantage for them. So, but again, it's that type of knowledge across the board could save builders and architects and all kinds of stuff, all kinds of different, time requirements to allow you to do more. Because it's like, okay, if you could pick up an extra 5 to 10 projects in a month without overwhelming you and having you cancel out your sleep patterns, it's like, okay, that makes sense, but that's where the efficiencies could come into play. But I agree with you. Early stages, but I think we will see it over the next few years. We're like, okay, let's try this. But again, just like anything, some people prefer a certain type of pen versus another one. It just is going to be preferences on what makes sense for your company and the clients you serve.
Yeah, AI is great. I think it helps you get to the solution quicker. I don't think it's going to be thinking, I don't want it to think for you, but I'd like to see it help. I mean, I like it when it helps me process faster and be able to come to the same conclusion quicker. So that's where I see the benefit of AI coming into play. And if we're able to standardize sustainability in everyone's means and methods and everyone's building in a sustainable way, like that would just be the right thing to do. And then we can add 5 to 6 projects, and there would be, that would just be great going forward.
Yeah, yeah, and turn around and reduce the time to get new builds and generate new jobs and all kinds of good stuff. So love this conversation. Where can people find out more about you and this amazing work you're doing?
You can find me at pepperconstruction.com on the high performance and sustainable construction page, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And I'll definitely have that in the show notes. So Susan, thanks so much for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation.
I did too. Thanks for having me.